Hi, I'm here today with writer and director Colin Henning to speak with him about his film Appalachian Dog, which will be released on video on demand on March 21st. Thank you so much for joining me today, Colin. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Absolutely. So, Appalachian Dog is this Southern Gothic story. Can you talk about what drew you to that genre of storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's so wonderful about that genre is that it is so ingrained in that culture. I mean, obviously it's in the name, but
Right.
with that comes combining elements of different genres as well. I mean, there's this sort of like our star of the movie Georgia would call it like a lowercase h horror aspect to it, in that it's like very suspense driven, it's very moody, it's very dark, but at the same time, like the humor of Southerners. I mean, I was raised in North Carolina, so it's like, the humor of that culture is also like inescapable. And I think that's part of it for me, is that balance between humor and suspense and how and melodrama and all those things working together instead of against each other.
Yeah, it was kind of funny because watching the film, I'm seeing all of this like secret keeping that happens, and it's almost an inch away from being a farce, kind of the way
Uh-huh.
that the relationships are intertwined and everything. Can you talk even just about like walking the line in the script and that to just keep it from just full farce?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that is like so prevalent in a lot of like Southern literature and Southern drama, is that really like heightened stakes of like whatever it is,
Mhm.
and also like heightened characterization. I think that's something that we see in all of the characters. I think especially like with Kate, and it's I think it comes from the characters want to keep up a facade so badly. So you're having all of this secret keeping, all of these, lying to each other and to themselves. And I think the thing that really keeps it from being just like only funny is the fact that ultimately it's a matter of characters lying to themselves. And like
Mhm.
that is such a tragic underbelly to everything. So what is funny is the characters' different interactions with each other. But then at the end of the day, it's yourself that pays the price of your own action.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you said you were, grew up in North Carolina, so you have these like close ties to Appalachia. Can you just talk about choosing that as the backdrop for this story?
Of course, yeah. It was for me it works as like a literary pressure cooker. So it's allowing these people to exist in this time and space that's so isolated. So they don't really have to worry about what like a larger external society is thinking of them. They have to worry about what each other thinks of them and what they think of themselves. And it leaves them in a setting that has there's very little they can hide behind.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So, kind of switching gears a little bit, it seems like filming a period piece and being an independent filmmaker would be kind of like at odds with each other because that's just not generally what you see in in that kind of like context. So can you talk about working with things like sets and drama and like costumes and everything with like a lower budget and yeah, kind of doing that on your own, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely enabled my clothing addiction, which is, a plus and a negative. Like, I love vintage clothing, and so a lot of these pieces I kind of already had,
Hmm.
especially pieces like for the set dressing and everything. And it just, I think that's another reason that I was also like, practically speaking, obviously I've written a lot of scripts, but when it came time to wanting to do one, working in North Carolina, working in my home, working in the mountains, that creates this isolation where you really can build that world because you're only building it for these four characters. Um, so the resources to be able to do that just seems so much more feasible. And part of what also helps is that it's everyday life. It's not glamorous. We're not seeing like Christian Dior's new look or anything like that. It's like Kate is another great example of somebody who's dressing in probably like her mother's or grandmother's clothing. So she looks very Edwardian, versus Marion, who can make her own clothing, is a lot more up to the standard of the time. And I think that's part of why, in general, I like working in period. Is it's harder to recognize those things when you are watching something that takes place now because we take it all for granted. But when you're watching a period piece, you can kind of think, oh, she's really like up to date in her look, or she looks really behind the times. It's a great way to like isolate an audience and also intrigue them and kind of reel them in.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think some of the like queer elements might catch people off guard in this, but can you just talk about why it was important to you to include that in the movie?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a gay filmmaker. My partner helped me produce it. He also was the editor on it. So obviously that's a huge part of who I am.
Mhm.
And I really wanted to have a story that depicts queer people with nuance where they are like not always making the best decisions, but that's not really directly correlated to the fact that they are queer. It's nobody's like the villain or anything here. We're not falling into that sort of like trope. And also the tragedy of the script doesn't also directly correlate to anybody being queer. It correlates to people making bad decisions for themselves. So I think for me, it was important to interweave a queer aspect into it pretty like seamlessly in a way that really is just about who these people are, whether they already know who they are or they're discovering who they are. It's also really moving to, or I've been very moved by people who have watched the movie and come to me recognizing themselves in those characters or recognizing their neighbor in those characters or their niece. Because when you're dealing with a time period, then these characters don't have the vocabulary for themselves that we do now, but they still have the same feelings. And the way that you watch that unfold in Shades of Grey, and in this region, which we think of as, something that would be really, anti-LGBTQT, LGBTQ plus. That's part of what's really excited me now is allowing that level of diversity to exist in a space where it's not often seen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm in West Virginia is where I'm coming from. So like right in the heart of that. And I'm always interested when I see films that depict something broader than what you expect from the region. And I think that was a big draw to me for this film. Yeah. Um, can you just talk about like uh, creating these characters? It's a largely like female cast and just working when you're writing these characters, can you talk about just kind of like getting into that mindset as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that like being a gay man has really helped me with because a lot of straight men don't have to think about like external pressures of society and how that like does help affect who you are. And so in terms of like writing women, it's really understanding just like, I don't know, first of all, for me, it's not really thinking about like, I'm going to write a woman. It's more just like having an understanding that certain groups of people, whether that would be like gay people or women or people of color, they're going to have structures of society that put more pressure on them than like an average straight man, or an average white straight man specifically. So that was something that I'm generally more drawn to women characters, I think, because I, as a person, identify more with that. And then, in terms of writing, in terms of, drama in general, the more pressures your character has, the more interesting the plot's going to be. And the more you can, like, kind of ride your theme home then.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you talk some about like sitting in the seat? You have so many roles in this. You're the director and the writer, and then one of the stars in the show, can in the film rather. Can you just talk a little bit about what it is to kind of wear all those hats and how you do that with other people and yeah, just kind of that whole aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, a huge part of it for me was really just like trusting the people I'm working with. Um, and when I did go to approach the script as the actor, really like kind of forgetting that I was the writer of this because the way that I'm going to see the story as a writer, I see where Teddy fits in this larger piece. And then I have to be unaware of that as the actor. And the key for that for me was really leaning into the contrasts that exist in the character. Um, like I weight trained and put on like 15 pounds of muscle because I figure, okay, this is a guy who really sees himself like as a man who's just come back from war. So I wanted the contrast of this like really physically imposing guy with somebody who, as the film goes on, keeps having his kind of like power and authority taken away from him. And somebody who, again, hasn't been told no a lot in their lives. And I think there's this sort of like almost childish aspect, this teenager aspect of like trying to get what he wants all the time and not understanding when he can't have it. So holding on to those contrasting elements were what helped me fall into the character. And I think once that kind of felt true to me, it's pretty easy to switch hats between actor and director, especially because we'd scheduled the script so that there were certain days where I'm only working like a half day as an actor just in the evening. So everything before dinner, I can just be, Mr. Director Man and do that kind of stuff.
Excellent. Yeah. So just as we kind of wrap up here, what would be the main takeaway you would hope audiences would have from watching this film?
That in order to be honest with other people, you first have to be honest with yourself.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's a really succinct way of saying that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me again. I really appreciate it. It's a beautiful film. I
Thank you.
wish you well on that.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.